Okay, hey, how's it going? And welcome back to the portal material. Let's continue. So in the last video, you guys saw another breakdown of exactly this market that's in front of you, right? You guys got to see it on kind of day one when I first took it without expecting anything, which should again teach you to psychologically view the market from a lens of we get in with the assessment or the assumption that price is not going to move, that price is not necessarily going to make a crazy move, and we simply get in and manage our position. And then maybe it starts playing out, and maybe it starts playing out very well. And here I am, the third day in a row, in this case, recording this piece of the portal material. And, this move has gone insane. I've taken my profits, and this actually became one of my biggest trades now of the year. Funny enough. So as I'm recording this portal material, I've now had, let me show you guys this. I've had one of my best trades of the year. You can see this was the trade right here. This is MSTR. So in this case, it's this asset under its EVCC. With a 25R secured. This is that initial kind of trade that I took where, I was expecting this thing just to come and stop me out, but instead it went for, the biggest move of all time. And you can see if you compare this 25 to everything else, right? There has never been anything else within that realm except the very first trade of this year that I took, which was actually 26.7. So actually the Bitcoin trade still wins. It's still the biggest one. But this is a phenomenal demonstration of what it looks like to follow rules, right? And despite not having taken any other trades that were similar to that, prior to this trade, I had already ended up the last few months since February very profitably, right? This is the analysis here. And by the way, this curve that you see here and this data collection, the data collection and your ability to go and input your own trades is all available to you within the data collection section of the course content area within the Discord. So just keep that in mind. But you can see, over the last few portal materials where we've gone into more depth on moving averages, started discussing it in reference to stage ones and stage two, so the composite operator getting involved, to labeling and understanding how prices move from accumulation MBs into momentum MBs and how those momentum MBs are springboards for a lower time frame cycle to start playing out. Right? You now got to see a trade that was taken and viewed and analyzed from the very, very bare backbone fundamental approach of cycle and ended up being just a disgustingly good runner, which is exactly what you're doing as a trader, right? So I kind of wanted to start this piece of portal material reminding you that, hey, right, as we're learning, as you're seeing examples, and actually there were other members that took this trade as well, as you guys saw, I think, in the last one, but as you're learning and seeing real examples and seeing tangible examples used by myself in reference to the labeling, in reference to the cycles, you also get to see firsthand how these concepts play out as a result, right? You literally got to see it from this day here when I told you, this thing is being bought up. It's moving higher with the averages. The averages are sloping upwards. That's telling us a story of orders coming in. As price begins to sell off, it doesn't sell off heavily. It doesn't just come crashing down. It instead gets bought up at the rising 5 or 10 or 20 moving average, which is what we want to see from a momentum cycle, and continues on that move. And hence why I traded this specific asset, was watching this asset, and why I traded this thing higher and got to take a really nice trade out of it. This is that trade that we took out of it right here. Absolutely phenomenal. There's nothing more to it. And I played out that cycle, and yes, it might go for another move. Who knows? Maybe this was the MMB4 right here. You can kind of see it. If I was to drop this was very likely the MMB4. If I put that in red, like this. And in this case, that MMB4 failed to continue following through and is beginning to sell down, right? So absolutely beautiful. Now, as I promised, before I move on to further portal material, I wanted to really embed this idea in your head in reference to anything and everything that I trade, and in reference to the timeframes that we operate with. So again, regardless of the time frame you operate with, this is going to apply to you. This is going to apply to your trading and the way that you view things. I'm just going to do it for now from the perspective of the EVCC that is rooted within an entry time from around a 15-minute to a 65-minute, a V of around a daily, and a C of around a weekly. So ultimately, right, the way we think about it is this is what I'm actually using to kind of execute and look for markets. But if we want to give it very, very specific timeframes, right, when I execute a 15-minute, I'm using the 65-minute / 90-minute, and then you get your EVCC. So again, this is the easy way to start with a simple bearing of understanding, right? EVC, and then grow that out to something that makes the most sense for you. Because as you label things, as you look at things, you will find specific scenarios where things are basically aligned, right? As a trader, the thing that you're learning to do for yourself is you're looking for optimal alignment along the lines of what you've seen happen before, right? Over and over and over again, so that the next time, once again, there's optimal alignment. So, the next time you start seeing a market, let me do it this way. The next time you see a market, let me put this like this, like this, like this. Let me check what's inside of here. Yeah, let's just delete that one. All right, so the next time you look at a market and you go through it step by step for yourself and you say, okay, this started coming out of this accumulation MB, or this stage 1, started to build a potential stage 2. Within that stage 2, it begins to make those fractal stage 1, so it starts to pause, and I expect that to be the MMB1. So that's what I might be seeing on a C timeframe. And you step down a little bit lower within that C timeframe delivery, and you start to look at what's going on your V. So again, ignore timeframe. Think in terms of orders, right? So again, just because I'm looking at the weekly, the daily, the 60-minute, and the 15-minute doesn't mean that you can't do other things, right? If you're trading other assets, or you're trading with a firm, or you want to trade very, very low time frame, then you're likely going to be looking at something like a 30-second, 5-minute, 10-minute, hourly, 4-hour, and that might be the way that you organize yourself in a market, in a trend, and decide if it's worth to trade it, because then you'll be looking for similar things across those timeframes, right? But as I step down into a daily, this is what I mean by alignment. As I had that bullishness, I step into this and I see bearishness and I wait. This is echoing the things you saw in the last video, in the last portal material, where just because a move is breaking down, or just because there's some kind of distribution being created, or distribution cycle being created, right? Distribution MB down, maybe it wants to be a momentum cycle down. We wait due to the alignment of the overall EVCC. So this is how you stay out of markets that are potentially breaking down, in waiting for them to potentially go up as an overall basis for following the directional bias of any given market, right? And then we had this accumulation MB come out of here. And as I started making those momentum MBs, these are the exact moments that I personally, right, tried to trade them. And I traded them higher as I started to follow this MMMB. I did that over and over and over again. And I followed this entire MMB cycle higher. And again, I didn't know if this was going to go up here, or even higher, right? I don't know. All I can do is follow my rules. And what I did is I executed. Well, at this time, there was a momentum MB4 forming. So what did I do? Well, I dropped into my lower time frame inside of that. And ultimately, as I did that, so let me open this up. Now, again, what you have here is on the right-hand side of the market, you have the market without these gray areas on there, because these are extended hours. And on the left side, you have it on with the gray area. So again, I use both. I go between both because they both can formulate for me where I am in the market. But ultimately, same exact thing happened. You made that accumulation MB out of here. That's this accumulation MB here, right? It's not as clear, but that's what's happening. It starts making an MMB1, and literally inside of here, either, right, I can use this MB1, MB2 as its own opportunity, right? Just like this. And I think some people in the mentorship traded this. This can be its own opportunity as well. I can use that to trade, or very simply, and as you guys have learned now, that MMB1, that momentum MB, also because of where it is and because it's the first one that's kind of above that 1020, acts as, that accumulation MB also acts as, for a lower time frame, a momentum MB. So when you step down inside of it, which is exactly what I did, what do we expect to see? Well, we simply expect to see the flush into double MB, into the formation of what we normally look for and expect to see. Now, the reason I started this specific portal material with this exact example is, one, you get to see it, kind of playing out and exactly as we've learned before. But two, because I really want to reiterate now how we use accumulation MBs, momentum MBs, and in this case, because we are on the moving averages now and understanding averages, the interaction of the moving averages with those principles. So why do I sometimes label an accumulation MB in a certain area? Why do I sometimes label a momentum MB and categorize it also as an accumulation MB, kind of like what you see here? There are a lot of nuances, a lot of minor reasons as to why that is, and we're going to get into those. But the very, very simple way to understand this, and this is where I'm going to introduce this to you, is that once again, you have different characteristics of what you're looking for based on the overall cycle you're looking at for the moving averages. And then on top of that, right? So all I mean by that, just to make it very visual for you, is that when you're talking about the entry cycle, so this would be the full cycle that we know and love, there's a different thing that you'll look for with the MAs, because you're looking for a different representation of what price is doing to start to decide if something is optimal to take a move on. And then the M cycle, which we'll call the momentum cycle, right? That's when price is going higher. There's also a different way within which we apply and use and think about the MAs. What you've learned so far is the application of MAs in reference to basically the momentum cycle. Because what you're learning to think about for now is if you have a momentum cycle, so assume this 65-minute, if I was trading this as a V or a C, because the momentum cycle is what occurs on the V and the C, right? As you've already learned. This cycle right here, this one right here that we are now coining and calling the momentum cycle is one that occurs on the V, the C, or multitudes of the V and C. And right, and at the moment, what you understand about that ultimately, right, is the starting reasons of the moving averages and their usage in reference to those averages of momentum, right? That being price begins a move, everything slopes higher, which is an indication that large money is starting to come in, and that's happening potentially after accumulation MBs like we just saw. Right? Then price sells off, and as it sells off, it's unable to sell down heavily because the composite operator and the institutions behind the move don't actually want to get rid of their positions. They want to load up on more. So the selling is met with very quick buy-ups of that selling, which happen at a rising 5, 10, or 20. And as price pauses, that creates an opportunity theoretically on the V timeframe to trade something like this, like if you really want to, right? Something like that or something like that. Or to jump inside of it because we understand a momentum MB is occurring and looking for the cycle to be playing out, right? So the first thing that I want you to understand from just this part is that the moving averages serve somewhat of a different purpose based on if we're looking at one of the two cycles, either the E cycle or the momentum cycle. Okay, and now so far you know that the momentum MBs are ultimately, because of the characteristics of momentum MBs, going to happen, well, at or above the 5, 10, and 20. This goes back to the MMB characteristics, the momentum MB characteristics that we had discussed before. So what I want to do now is I want to further complement our understanding of accumulation MBs, momentum MBs, and their fractals right now, just by looking at a few examples that are right here. So again, I did not pre-plan the exact examples I want to look at because I want this to be as clear as possible in reference to exactly the stuff that maybe I've had on my list, that I maybe been watching, that I maybe watched before, to really make it clear to you that, I'm not cherry picking certain markets that do everything perfectly, even though as a trader, what you're going to do is you're going to get good at cherry picking the markets that are going to move well so you can make the most amount of money, right? That's literally how trading works. Instead, I just want to go through the stuff that I've watched, kind of have traded, so I can show you the exact concept utilized, right? And how we think about the accumulation MB and momentum MB and the fractals of it in reference to the moving averages. So you got to see this MSTR example a few times. So let me go to something new, maybe to refresh your mind, and we can go through kind of the steps again on something else. So I've done NVIDIA as well. Maybe for now, I'll just do Bitcoin because Bitcoin has been, like another one of those really, really clear, nice movers. Let me see if I have anything saved on this. I don't. Maybe I'll do it on GBTC. This is also Bitcoin, but it might just be easier to do this so we can see more. Sure, I'll do it on this. This is perfectly fine. So let's go to the weekly. Again, I'm going to start with an EVCC. Oh, it looks like I started it on this. Okay, cool. So we'll do it on this. And it looks like, okay, let's delete all this. Beautiful. That ain't going to cut it. That ain't going to cut it. All right, we're going to delete all this. And we'll just start kind of fresh, right? Because I want you to see the things that I discuss and showcase over and over and over again. And I'm going to introduce you, in a sense, to labeling now, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to just start kind of left here. And we're going to wait for the first move up, which kind of happened here, right? We kind of got a really nice move out of that. And that started some kind of push. And then price began to break down a little bit, started to push. Kind of paused, and then started to break down on the bearish side. So this breakdown on the bearish side was the first time that, because we're looking to get to the most recent action, so I can show you how I prepare myself for any given current action, right, is by going back and understanding where I came from, right? That's ultimately what you're doing as a trader. You're understanding where you came from, how the orders came into the market during that time, what the underlying cycle is right now, whether it's clean or not, and then you're deciding whether you want to continue following it or not, right? That's how risk is taken. That's how you lead yourself to decisions. So when I see this right here, right, I instantly view this as what I call distribution MB. So again, think to the same things we saw before, accumulation MBs, and whatnot, but this is just on the downside of it, right? So what's happening here ultimately is that price is moving higher and then basically building multiple MBs. And what I'm doing ultimately, right, is I'm trying to draw a line through some kind of MB low or a lot of price action that can find under that then gets broken down like it does here. And you can even do this beforehand, right? Because you can understand that at this point here, right, had price, let's let it go to the next candle, right? What you can do is you have the understanding that if price, so at this time, right, this might be a market you might consider bullish, but you also have the understanding that had price broken down through the formation of whatever's happening here, that would now act as a potential distribution and potentially even set a market into bearishness, right? That's ultimately what's happening here. Now, at the time, there's going to be a few concepts here, but at the time, you were kind of moving in this bullish range here. And you did have a prior move upwards. So these are aspects of the market that are important just to consider, granted what's here. But at the moment, I just want to focus on the cycles, right? So if price breaks down here, I would consider that distribution. This is exactly what that is. So when this happens, right, I'm basically in a mode of this thing wants to actually sell off. It's maybe going to go into momentum MB's bearish, whatever it might be, right? And we wait because it either goes into bearishness or it doesn't. Now, at the time, if this was the market, what I'd be going through or thinking to myself is, if price can trade above this high, that would probably act as the formation of an actual accumulation MB. So if price right now on this next candle kind of does something like this, that would probably put in motion an accumulation MB that then would kickstart the process that we all know and love, a double MB, which acts as maybe an accumulation MB, or the first momentum MB. So again, think back to the portal material that you've already gone through. Ultimately, this accumulation MB happens. This right here would be an accumulation MB number 2, known as a double MB, right? But at the same time, because we're using fractals and because this time frame here acts as a context-based time frame, EVC, it's part of the C, we know that the next step is to jump lower, which means that in the case that they're selling here and the selling is supported by rising averages, then I could also characterize this MB here as a momentum MB1. Because ultimately what's happening is that double MB or that double accumulation MB is also acting as the first momentum that's going to be part of that lower time frame setup. So that is why you will see me sometimes label something accumulation, and then the next thing can be labeled accumulation MB2 or MMB1. And here's some other important stuff. Based on how this move now begins to develop, this is why I label it kind of like this sometimes. And sometimes what you'll find is on my charts, what you'll see is basically this. Sometimes you'll see this, and then I'll label a momentum MB1 somewhere here. Now, the truth is I will only do something like this right here when the market has already delivered multiple momentum MBs. So this is where it gets a little bit weird, and I didn't know how I wanted to introduce this, and I think what I'm doing right now might be the best way to do it. But ultimately, the reason that I would now label this as this later in time is because of how the move has now responded to its overall delivery. So in the chance that price, let's say, goes sideways here to the moving averages, right, maybe really clearly or something like so, then moves higher, right, very clearly, and starts going sideways again, right, clearly. Now this would also be a momentum MB. So let's assume that this was actually labeled accumulation MB2 / MMB1, which it would be. And even if price looked like this right now, and this was live price, I would now simply label this as MMB2. I'll simply label this as MMB3. And again, with the same expectation of price will move higher, price will pause for MMB4, price will move higher, and then probably break down. Because on average, that's how moves tend to operate. Now, what's going to happen is in the event that this momentum MB3 gets validated, right, it starts that mini move, and then it starts this MMB4, and then it moves, and maybe it doesn't even go crazy. Let's just say it kind of does this, and then all of a sudden, again, it pauses, and it pauses really cleanly. At that point, right, I want to ask myself, is this move here and MMB5, right? So that way I shouldn't really pay attention to it until price truly kind of, right? So again, same thing, unless price truly, let's say, does something like this and breaks down for distribution and then resets, right? Is that something that I should now do? So I should walk away from that market because the cycle of momentum is coming to an end, or likely coming to an end due to the principles of the concepts taught here. Or is this actually acting due to the way that this selling is happening, due to the way that the momentum is still being supported? Is this actually acting as an MMB4, which means this might be acting as an MMB3, which means this might be acting as an MMB2, which means this might be acting as an MMB1. And then we get to this time where sometimes on my charts, you'll see me label the moves prior like this, right? And then what happens is you might have the confusion in your mind to think, what's the difference now between an accumulation MB2 or an accumulation MB and a momentum MB? But the real difference is only true in a scenario like this, which is usually not the case. So ultimately what's happening is this accumulation MB2 and MMB1 operate as the same thing. That is why you've now learned prior, through the prior portal material, as you guys know, that's why you learned this part right here. You learn to think about the market in a fractal sense to assign a major cycle, right? So you see those accumulation MBs forming, but at the same time to understand that as those accumulation MBs form, and like the second one forms at or above the moving averages, that's actually acting as a momentum MB, right? So this is this idea where, again, you have that accumulation MB form. It starts coming over the average. That's like the accumulation MB. And as the second accumulation MB forms, hence the label here, accumulation MBs, this is also yellow, which means accumulation MB, at the same time, in a very shitty yellow color, and I'm very sorry, this hurts my eyes too, and I hope it doesn't hurt yours, but I know it does, okay? It's an accumulation MB2, but also it's the first momentum MB. If the time frame that we're assuming here is a validation time frame, or the momentum cycle time frame, right? Which means that if we step down inside of it, we get to the fractals we talked about, right? Inside of it, we might have the accumulation MB, and this acts as also an accumulation MB, but at the same time, as per the red here, it acts as a momentum MB, because if we step inside of it, we see the same thing. Okay, so this is exactly why you see me refer to the secondary accumulation MB as a momentum as MB as well. Now, this is important because this starts to further go into the characteristics of accumulation versus momentum MBs in reference to the averages and where they're happening, right? Because I am using the moving averages, the ones on my chart, to actually define more clearly where the true accumulation MB initially was, because it's coming out of that area. So clear stage one is being validated with stage two. And then the next accumulation MB, which usually will happen at or above the moving averages, can actually now be also inferred as a momentum MB. This is where that characteristic of moving averages comes in. So let me show you what I mean. So this is the expectancy that I would have on this market at this time. Now notice, right, I drew a specific gray line, and we'll talk about labeling even more in depth together later, because we're going to do even more examples like these on live markets as well, because I'm actually trading live markets, and I'm going to teach you how to use that in reference to the screener and the other software that you have access to here, right, to really kind of pinpoint where you might be in a market and if it becomes worth watching it for any reason. Okay. So at this time, right, what I would do is I would suppose that kind of if price traded above this here through a big candle like this, that would very likely be an accumulation MB for me and could kickstart the next accumulation MBs, which would be momentum MBs. Now, there is some really important things in reference to this accumulation MB that's leading me to decide that this could be a good area given current action. So now is a time to really, really listen, because here goes the moving average discussion where we kind of break it down in a lot more depth, right? That's what I want to do for you. So this is now characteristics like almost advanced. This is advanced characteristics that once you understand, it's going to seem super easy. Everything's going to be great, especially as you do more testing. It's going to seem amazing. But these characteristics are very, very important and vital to understand. So ultimately, what I want to do is I want to define, as we've spoken about before, the first accumulation MB or an accumulation MB as price basically comes out, validates some MB, but does so kind of over a plateau of the 10 and 20 moving average, which is why you've seen me say before, I wouldn't really consider this necessarily a accumulation MB here if it broke out and did something like this, because I'm uncertain. I'm uncertain if that is maybe building a momentum MB, right? It's harder to do so. So I want something that's more clearly defined as an accumulation MB. So at this time, what I would do is I would decide that if price was to come higher, getting above the 10 and 20, so this is the interaction of the moving average in reference to the major cycle or through flush outs and through the actual accumulation MBs rather than the momentum ones initially, right? I would want to see the accumulation MB prove itself as it maybe got above this high. Now, as price goes on and I wait for that to happen, what can also happen is price can start forming some lower areas of potential momentum MB, of potential accumulation MBs. So all of a sudden, as price continues to form, even though you can see I have this set as the area I would expect an accumulation MB, and I'm waiting for that to happen. As the weeks come, and I'm not trading this because there's no clarity in my overall EVCC for what I want to wait for, as this continues to form whatever it's forming here, right, my brain might go to something like, okay, due to the fact that the averages have now kind of caught up to price here, I can see this high right now acting as a potential first accumulation MB. So again, if I can see price push through and kind of close above, right? So close up here, that would very, very likely actually be an area that I would define as a validated or beginning to be validated, because remember, prices are not perfect. Stage ones don't just go stage one, right, into stage two, into a perfect stage one, right? Instead, those next stage ones or stage twos can literally, kind of tap back in and play at that MB level before making that move, which is where a momentum MB could actually happen. That's where it could happen, right? So what happens is as the weeks go on, or in this case, as the candles go on, because again, if you're trading like a 1 hour as your context time frame, these would be hours, right? 1 hour, 2 hours went on. But as in this case, for me, on my context time frame, as the weeks went on, this high here basically very clearly demonstrates that if big orders were to come in and buy up something like this and get above this area, that would very well act as the potentially validated accumulation MB. And the expectation would now be double MB, continuation, or move higher, double MB up here, or momentum MB very clearly now, move higher, right? So that's how labeling starts to work, right? But now the characteristic there, right, is that price needs to get above that 10 or 20, so 10/20, and it depends on the move. That's why I say the 10 or 20, 10/20, because what's going to happen is it's going to build this kind of pocket of demand. That's what it's doing. It's building a pocket of demand. It's building that Ment block, right? Ment block, yeah, literally. And as we can get above it, if we can, we are proving that orders are coming in. So that's where I would now assume an accumulation MB would happen. Now notice what happens. Price keeps going sideways. Price keeps going sideways. And then it kind of breaks higher here. And, at this point, some people, and again, I want this to be very clear because I'm teaching you to think for yourself and to act for yourself in the market, because that's the only way you're going to make money. Some people might actually just label this high here as the accumulation MB, and that's fine. Some people might literally go right now and say, okay, that's my accumulation MB. I'm happy with it. Now I'm waiting for this to go sideways. And if it can, right here on these rising averages, it could be the first one. That'll be my momentum MB to move higher. Or my, as we said before, accumulation MB2 / momentum MB1, because they act as the same thing. Remember that, because it's a fractal of the next V or the next C or the next V into the E, because the E is the entry. Okay, but I personally, at this time, would ignore all this and still say, no, given this move, I really want to see price trade above at least this area here, because that would kind of clarify there's an accumulation MB for me. So I'm going to get rid of the label for now and wait for that to happen. So now I would do nothing, I would do nothing, I would do nothing. I would expect this is all just building an MB, right? And then on this candle, as it ends, that weekly candle ends, just like that, I'm thinking to myself, perfection, right? This is maybe starting a new move. I expect this to be, right? So now I can label, I expect this to be the accumulation MB. And very simply now, right? Yes, we kind of missed this one. That could be a momentum MB2, but that's okay, right? This validates the accumulation MB. And the next step is to basically say, okay, we're probably going to make a double MB now. So let's do it through our normal thing where box, we could make a double MB here, but that is now going to act as, because of where it's happening. So here's the characteristic. When an MB after the accumulation MB happens at or above the 10 and 20 moving average, that first accumulation MB also acts as the momentum MB. It's as simple as that. It's not actually complex, but you need to understand this and understand the whys behind it. That is why it's actually happening. So I wait, and price goes higher. And there's nothing for me to really do, right? Because ultimately, and again, this is going to be a lower time frame delivery, of course. Here it is, right? Because as we come out of that accumulation MB, we're already expecting this is going to start a cycle of a lower time frame, right? So clearly, what happens now is, if we look inside of here, you get that same thing. You get the accumulation MB here, and then the double MB, which could be this whole thing here, actually acts as, right? Because I'm going to draw it with the lines that I normally do, because the lines define for me that it's a momentum MB, and they define for me where kind of price needs to kind of come out of, or where it's going to come out of to become a mover. And I'm just very used to looking at that. But very simply, if I was to label this on a lower time frame, right, you have that accumulation MB inside of it. Let's make it blue. And this, as we spoke about, and as I'm now providing to you, is an accumulation MB2. But I'm not going to label it as that, because usually this is going to act as the first MMB1. So instead, it simply becomes an MMB1. Now, again, if I was to ask you a quiz question right now, what would make me label this an accumulation MB2? What is your answer going to be? You should be able to recite the answer from the stuff you've already learned today. So pause it, think about it, give me an answer. And now, very simply, here's your answer. The only way that I would label this an accumulation MB2 is either if, one, it was still very deep in this area and it just makes sense to label it as an accumulation MB, which I probably still wouldn't do. But two, and the correct answer, is that if this move continues, which it's doing right now, and goes through this momentum MB2, and now goes through momentum MB3, right, and then goes through, because my expectancy would be it goes, it maybe goes sideways, maybe makes an MMB4, goes, and then if it's going sideways cleanly, at that point, and this should be the right answer, at the point that already the move is playing out to a fourth MMB, is the only time I would consider relabeling this as an accumulation MB. But this right here, just as you've learned through the normal cycle material, still is a double MB, thereby making it an accumulation MB. But we label it as momentum MB because we are on a time frame that is not our entry time frame. That's how that works. That's that characteristic. So the initial characteristic of a accumulation MB is that it pushes and validates, basically breaks with a candle above a stage one area that you define, usually along the lines of the 10 and 20. So it's a break almost above the 10 and 20. And then the next pause is always an MMB1. Okay, so as such, if we continue labeling this now, let me get rid of, what I'll do is I'll take all of these and I'll throw them into a daily pile so they're not in our way. I'll throw this guy and this guy into the daily pile as well. There we are. And we're back to just viewing and thinking about the weekly for now. Because again, I want you to get used to doing this over and over and over again. So now any pause, right, a clear pause, something like this, is now the starting potential buildup, right? Because the selling's coming in, it's on the rising 5, 10, and 20, right? This is the start of momentum MB1, right? Here we are. White. There we are. And this is a little hard and a little weird when I'm doing this because, again, like I said, this area here could be the accumulation MB, which would make this MMB1. And again, based on how this move goes, I could also consider this the MMB1. So I'm going to do that for now because maybe it'll meet our rules. Because now after the fact, so again, this is hindsight. In hindsight, I would now be happy to assume this is an MMB1, even if, let's say, I didn't trade it. That's okay. My labels can change over time, and labels can be made clear to you. And it doesn't mean that when they first started that because you didn't trade them that it's wrong, right? A label can update over time. So I do think that now, when I'm looking at this, it makes sense to value this as the accumulation MB or this. Honestly, I would still probably label this as the accumulation MB. But for the purpose of this lesson, I'm going to label this the MMB1. And now the next pause I would label as the MMB2. In reference to this exact market. So this is that selling that comes in, right? And then it starts that move higher. So beautiful. That momentum MB2 starts another move higher. So that's that mini stage 1 to stage 2, made up of a lower time frame breakdown, and then the start of a new cycle inside of here through new momentum MBs right there. Beautiful. And these are going to act right here as opportunities, right? These are going to be those double MBs inside of there that are going to be phenomenal opportunities to take this thing higher. And that's exactly what a lot of my team did. But now the expectancy would be an MMB3, right? So selling starts to come in. The selling is not large. The selling does not completely yeet down and completely give up all gains. Instead, it simply stops. And now it's again finding itself in the rising 5, 10, 20. And the expectancy is this is going to build an MMB3 to continue a move higher, to build an MMB4 to continue a move higher at the moment, right? So very simply, that's what I wait for. So it starts building that MMB3 and it starts to fail a little bit. Now, as this is happening, notice what it also starts doing. It starts to build kind of this plateau, this stage 1 area, right? Where if price pushes and breaks below it, that would now very clearly potentially signal a distribution MB, which means we might go into another one of these areas where we might want to wait, but we see if that happens, right? That's what happens in the market. And instead of doing that, it sells off beautifully. And this MMB3 looks like it wants to continue at the moment, right? This is how you create consistency behind your thoughts in the market. So MMB3, so the next thing we expect is an MMB4. Now this is, a very quick pause. I probably would not have labeled that one personally, so I'll leave it unlabeled. So we still expect that price is probably going to make an MMB4, make a push, and that would be the it of the move. But in the case that the next MMB4 goes, and then the next candle is like when it starts pausing, maybe up here, is super clear, that could now mean that we would change this back to the initial move like that, and then correspondingly move everything, because now it's defining the cycle for us, because we don't always know, right? It's very important to understand that. And the move, as it delivers, will show us what we should basically expect out of that given market. So now price is pausing again. And again, the selling right now is not major. So I'm assuming as this is happening, this is very likely MMB4. And again, look at the characteristics. The initial accumulation MBs are doing what? They're coming up over the 10 and 20 MA initially. So that's that initial buying that's proving to us. And the momentum MBs are happening when the slope of the averages begins to move higher, price sells off to them, gets bought right up because the institutions want to buy right back in, want to eat right back up, want to make more profit, buy back in, can't let this thing go lower, continue the momentum cycle. So again, the expectation right now is they want to continue that momentum cycle. So that's what we wait for. Still looks great, right? The expectancy here is that this is going to result in another move. And that should be the last move. But in the scenario that it starts being very clean, it won't be the last move. And again, look at this, right? It's pausing beautifully. Look at the way it's coming down into the 5. And in this case, now the rising 10, rising 20, and being bought up. The expectancy now, if I was trading this live, is a move like so. And that's it. That's what I would wait for. And then price fails down, and look what it does. If this candle now closes below here, right, that would start basically a very clear distribution to me, and I would simply walk away from this market. So I will wait for that to close, actually. Okay, so it doesn't close below there. So this stays relatively bullish, and it's still in that momentum MB4, and that should start to move higher. Might pause again inside of here, which is fine, but being bought up clearly, right, and this should start that move higher through that momentum MB4. And again, beautiful. And take a look at this. See if it closes, it does. And that becomes my distribution MB. So now this is one of those areas where simply as it goes into distribution, right, the idea, right, is that, hey, this is going to start some kind of bearish market over some time, right? Or, and again, this is how we continuously think about what the market is actually telling us. We do what? We get back above an accumulation MB, close above, and we start putting in new action to the top side, because now what does this break act as? What does this line act as? Think back to your initial teachings across timeframes. Think back to an entry timeframe approach and thought process. Here, let's do it this way. That's right. This distribution or this breakdown in the MB is actually the buildup of new potential accumulation. This is known as a reaccumulation. So in the event that this happens, we are proving reaccumulation because the anticipation of the higher low rule is being met. And that's going to, once again, start a potentially new cycle that we can be a participant of, because that's how markets move. This is how orders come into it. So we wait, we wait, we wait. And that creates an accumulation MB. So what do I expect now? Why did I use this area first of all? Because above this MB, we will have pushed above a 10 and a 20, and the push above indicates money coming in. The close above indicates the money sustaining, and the next pause, if it happens, is going to act as what? Well, because this is a context time frame and a momentum cycle, it's always going to act as the MMB1, even though it's also an accumulation MB. So if it pauses, which it doesn't pause, it just sells off, and instead basically chops itself out, and it recreates, basically the distribution MB, this one right here. Kind of like, you could look at this area here as a distribution MB, right? Or you could just draw this out further, because again, it kind of like lines up. Because again, what you're doing is you're thinking about all this as a cluster of orders now, right, as a stage one, and price kind of moving out of it and proving out of it is a demonstration that, hey, we could be starting a bearish move. We don't know, right? And I actually got chopped up a few times here. I took a few trades like in here, and I think I even tried something in here. No, I remember. No, I don't think I tried anything here, but I did try something up here, and I took like a loss or a break even, and that's fine. That's the game. So we go back to it, but look at this, right? It breaks down, and now it might be pausing for a momentum MB to go down. So we wait, we allow its thing to do its thing. And once again, right, if you consider where would an accumulation MB kind of be clear, right? Because now we're starting to go back and forth quite a bit, you know, kind of above here, because a close above there would be above the averages, and this can even be a little bit after the fact. So I would just draw that line in. And again, we've created an accumulation MB. And at this point, I haven't spoken about this much, but when you get a distribution into an accumulation, into a distribution, into an accumulation, and then if it broke down again, like here, right? Because this would now be a potential distribution MB. And if it broke down like this would be a market I'd probably step away from and wait a while for it to do whatever it's doing and to really get out of a bigger stage one and to really start a new move somewhere else, right? So when you have a lot of, and this is why labels are important, because as you're labeling, if something is literally being labeled as something that's clean, something that's clear, moving in a generally clear enough cycle and then continuing those moves, that's something you want to trade. If you're labeling something and it's continuously proving to go kind of back and forth, then you are putting yourself in an environment that might go back and forth. So basically, if price kind of broke here, I would probably walk away from this market and ignore it, because that would be a new distribution MB. Otherwise, the expectation now is the next pause, even if it's this one, I don't know if it's going to be this one, but if this next pause happens, accumulation MB1, this would be accumulation MB2, wherever it might happen. And if that happens, it's also a momentum MB1. Just exactly in line with what you've already understood before. Because again, we're on a context-based time frame, so that means that we have to assume that the accumulation MB is now happening above the 10 and 20, because that's our characteristic, is acting as the momentum MB1 of that time frame. So price breaks down, and right in this case, again, like when I'm looking at this, I'm not going to use this low as a distribution. So again, this is really trash right now, right? If anything, we're just ranging this area. And when I look at this, right, I'm looking across all the action. I'm thinking, where could a clear stage one be where, like, if it's breaking down below it, it's clear distribution. When I'm looking at this, right, I'm thinking kind of through this line here, almost as a imaginary supply, right? So maybe even I can use this candle low. You know, there's not really clear, but something like this. So ultimately, right, if price again, candlestick breaks down like this is as clear as day, a market I don't want to watch. If that can't happen, I think this thing is back in accumulation. But what I would do now is I'd kind of look at this area or this area here as the accumulation buildup, because again, I want to get it above the averages and I want it to start proving that money's coming in. So I'd wait. And again, like, this is just really trash action. I don't even know how I would label this, but yes, this would be a distribution MB. And now I would ignore this thing, okay, until it basically made something clearer, because now there's a lot of chop. There's a lot of back and forth in terms of its actions, which means I don't want to be part of that. So I'm just going to wait. And that's all I'm going to do. All right, and then what happens? Price comes down, pauses. I don't even know what it's doing, but I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, right, price starts going higher here. Now, at that point, I'm like, okay, clearly accumulation is back in the mix. And it's okay that I missed it. But now, after the fact, because sometimes your labels and based on what you're looking at will happen after the fact, I can look at this high here and this MB formation, and because it's in line with a candle getting above it and in line with where it is in reference to the averages, I could look at this as a label for the accumulation MB, right? Just like that. Probably cancel this one, something like this. Then I already know that this second accumulation MB was already an opportunity, and that opportunity is in the reference to being a momentum MB1. And now very simply, either price can keep making another MB1, right? Because price sometimes go higher, pause, and then keep going, which could be still part of the MB1, or this might start a move and then make another MMB up here. But again, this is only the context time frame. I know this move here is going to be made up of multiple inside, so on the daily, momentum MBs now for me to take advantage of, because I know that now this, take a look, this area here, basically, acts as the accumulation MB of that lower time frame. Absolutely beautiful, right? And then I know that's going to start moves for me to be able to be in higher. But if I look at this here, and I continue looking at it on the weekly, because that's all I'm doing right now to basically decide and see momentum MBs and accumulation MBs, and I'm kind of showing you right now how to start using your labels, right? MMB1 creates that opportunity on the daily, right? Beautiful pause. Well, that's still that MMB1. This all acts as kind of that MMB1, right? You can see that, and starts that move higher, right? And look at what it is on the daily. It's those initial momentum MBs right here on the daily, which as a validation would give you opportunities inside of here, and maybe a little bit higher if you're trading the momentum MBs as well of a lower time frame. And that started this insane move. So what's cool now is based on what it's done and where it is and what it's been doing, right? I already know that the expectancy is at some point, hopefully soon, an MMMB2. And I start labeling it. And I wanted you to see that this is why I treat the accumulation MBs and the momentum MBs as one and the same thing based on what cycle you're looking for, based on what time frame you're looking for. And that's exactly how this move came about. And funny enough, this Bitcoin move that came about, if you take a look at it, right? Moved higher, momentum MB1, momentum MB2, 2, these kind of can act together. MMMB3, something like that, right? And then as this goes, the expectation is MMB4, move, failure, and that failure, take a look, is going to do what? That flush is going to act as the buildup of another MMMB, and if it goes like super deep, maybe it'll be a distribution here, which acts as that anticipation of a higher low, starts a new accumulation, starts giving you momentum MBs through an accumulation MB2. So again, this is an MB1, MB2, accumulation MBs, but because of where it's happening, and assuming the lines, right, will be something like this. Because of where it's happening, we assume this is probably the MB1, something like this, right, because it moves higher. And then the pause is the MMB to give us new entries. And this is exactly how I set myself up for a new market or a market over the next year that I might watch, because again, I'm using a higher time frame. Because all I'm doing is I'm looking at the cycle and I'm saying, okay, is this something I want to keep an eye on or not? And that's exactly how those cycles are built. And funny enough, this exact move, if you look at these orange things here, Bitcoin 1, which is a future, Bitcoin USD, GBTC, and MSTR and Coin, all in orange, are basically the same thing. They all interact as like very correlated pairs, right? So when I go to MSTR, it's pretty much the same move. If anything, it's even more strong because it's very highly leveraged on crypto. And this is exactly what I traded. That's where this trade came from, right? And it only took this tiny move on the weekly. If you take a look at this, right? Same thing, accumulation MB, MMB1, insane move from that. And the next step is basically, if we can sell off nicely over time without making something super drastic, then that's going to create a beautiful daily distribution, which again, as we think about it across timeframes, this creates a, pauses, momentum, accumulation MB breaks down through it, right? Because the averages start kind of coming up and something like this happens, maybe something like this. That starts a potential distribution that I'm not going to look to trade down because of the thing you learned in the last portal video, right? Starts maybe breaking down for a little bit, whatever, maybe it starts fucking around like this. And then again, there might be some MB here or high that I'm really interested in. If price gets getting above the averages, that gives me the characteristic to consider this as the accumulation MB, hence the label. And the next pause, once again, that would be a double MB or an accumulation MB2, now acts as the MB1, momentum MB1, which is the starting principle for me to now look for opportunities. And that's where I want to follow my opportunities. And this is how markets repeat the exact same cycle over and over and over again. And given that their characteristics are in line with the initial accumulation MBs, momentum MBs, they provide opportunity for you as a trader, right? Because again, this could just sell off like this, and there's nothing for me to do, right? There could just, it's just downfall. There's nothing to touch, nothing to do, and it goes into a full distribution. There's nothing to touch, right? On the opposite side, if it continues to sustain its EVC move, its MMB2 in this case on the higher time frame, and as a result, a distribution into new accumulations, which act as the anticipations of the higher low of a lower time frame because of how markets work and how things accumulate, because on a lower time it's going to be a major flush down and it's going to build up your first stage twos, and those are going to create those flushes into opportunities for you to take on your entry time frames. And this is why it's very important to understand the characteristics first of all, and how to use the characteristics in reference to the averages. So the averages, right, because they're how orders are coming in, are telling us a story. When, and we've only started with the first part of the story, when the averages are coming upwards, sloping upwards, and it's putting that in the momentum cycle and it's being bought up, that's a piece of the story that's saying, hey, this thing's being bought up. But as that's happening, the lower timeframes go into the breakdown of the averages, and the way those breakdowns happen through the accumulation or distribution MBs and how they prove themselves, reaccumulate, those produce those opportunities that for us, we want to take as traders. Right? And that is the characteristics of the averages in relation to the accumulation MBs, momentum MBs, and how, once again, accumulation MBs, or the second one of a higher time frame that isn't the entry cycle time frame, acts as the first momentum MB in a momentum cycle.